When I was about 8 or 9 years old, my life took a turn into the inexplicable, shaping me into the person I am today. A person some might call dark, others might simply call lost. But I know better. I'm neither lost nor misunderstood. I'm enlightened, though the light I've uncovered comes shrouded in an all-encompassing darkness. It all began on a day that seemed as ordinary as any other. My mother, ever the vigilant caretaker, picked me up from school early because I had thrown up. The cafeteria food that day had been a grotesque experiment, some mutant casserole I foolishly ate. It didn't agree with me, but I wasn't truly sick. At least, not in the way anyone might have thought. I lay on the couch in our dimly lit living room, while my mother rushed to the corner store to fetch ginger ale and crackers, her usual remedy for anything stomach-related. The house was still. My siblings weren't home yet, and the silence pressed on my ears like a living thing. The dull afternoon light filtering through the curtains painted long, creeping shadows on the walls. Shadows that seemed to shift when I wasn't looking directly at them. I told myself it was my imagination. It always had been, hadn't it? I'd seen shadows before, odd shapes and fleeting figures in the corners of my eyes. But this was different. I turned my head toward the dining room, which was partially obscured by the archway separating it from the living room. My eyes were drawn to a specific spot on the far wall, a recessed area where my mother stored odds and ends, things like old photo albums and holiday decorations. It was a harmless nook, but that day it became something else entirely. The air seemed to ripple like heat waves rising from asphalt, and then a black spiral began to materialize on the floor. It wasn't like the shadows I had seen before. This was deliberate, purposeful, alive. The spiral widened, and from its center emerged a figure that still haunts my dreams. It was tall, cloaked in black, with a hood that obscured its face entirely. In its skeletal hand, it held a scythe so dark it seemed to absorb the feeble light around it. The sight of it filled me with a terror so profound I couldn't move. My breath hitched, and my body locked up as though the air itself had turned to ice. I wanted to scream, to call for my mother, but no sound escaped my throat. Instead, I curled into a fetal position on the couch, squeezing my eyes shut so tightly that stars burst behind my lids. I stayed that way, trembling, until I heard the front door open and my mother's familiar footsteps approach. She found me clutching a throw pillow like it was a life raft. I ran to her, sobbing, desperate to bury myself in her embrace and escape whatever malevolent presence I'd just witnessed. But when I tried to explain, she dismissed it as fevered imaginings. "It's just your imagination, sweetie," she said, stroking my hair. "You're not feeling well, that's all." I knew better. That thing, whatever it was real. And it had seen me. Years passed, but the memory never faded. If anything, it deepened, becoming a shadow over my life. I'd see it in my dreams, that same cloaked figure emerging from a void. Sometimes it stood motionless, watching. Other times it spoke, though its voice was more of a feeling, a cold dread that slithered into my mind and whispered promises of power, of understanding. I tried to ignore it, to pretend it wasn't real, but the shadows followed me everywhere. I saw them in dark corners, in the flicker of streetlights, even in the glare of daylight. They'd stretch and twist into shapes that seemed almost human, but not quite. By the time I was a teenager, I'd stopped trying to convince anyone else of what I'd seen. My siblings teased me relentlessly whenever I brought it up, and my mother eventually forbade me from mentioning it. "You're scaring your brothers and sisters," she'd say. "Let it go." But I couldn't let it go. The figure didn't want me to. It started asking things of me, small things at first. Leave the door unlocked tonight, it whispered. Take the key from your father's desk. I'd wake up in the morning with no memory of doing these things, but the evidence was always there. The door ajar, the key missing, later found in strange places like the backyard or the basement. As the years went on, the requests became darker. I won't recount them all here, but suffice it to say they chipped away at whatever innocence I might have had. I became someone else, someone colder, someone who didn't flinch at the shadows anymore but embraced them. Now, as an adult, I've come to terms with what I am. The figure wasn't a demon, at least not in the traditional sense. It was something older, something that existed before the lines between good and evil were drawn. And it had chosen me. The figure's influence over me grew steadily, like a vine creeping up a tree, its tendrils tightening around my soul. I didn't just see it in my dreams anymore. It manifested in subtle ways in my waking life. Shadows seemed to cling to me, darker and longer than those of the people around me. The air around me always seemed cooler, as if I carried a fragment of that void with me wherever I went. When I turned 18, everything changed. By then, I had learned not to fear the figure but to respect it. Fear was useless. It only gave the figure more power over me. Instead, I treated it like an old acquaintance, one who always lingered on the edge of my awareness. It never left me alone for long, though. And on the night of my 18th birthday, it finally revealed its purpose. The party had ended hours earlier. My friends and family had gone home, leaving me alone in the house. I'd cleaned up the mess, turned off the lights, and was about to head to bed when I felt it. A chill that seeped into my bones, so cold it burned. I knew what it meant. I wasn't surprised when I turned around and saw the figure standing in the corner of the living room, its side glinting faintly in the moonlight streaming through the window. "It's time," it said, not with words, but with that same invasive dread that slithered into my mind. "Time for what?" I asked, my voice steadier than I expected. It didn't answer. Instead, it raised its free hand and pointed to the front door. The gesture was simple, but its meaning was clear. "Follow me." I hesitated only for a moment before stepping forward, drawn by a compulsion I couldn't resist. The door opened on its own as I approached, and I stepped out into the night. The streets were deserted, the town eerily silent. The figure floated ahead of me, its movements smooth and soundless. I followed it through winding streets and dark alleys, past places I'd never been before. The farther we went, the stranger the surroundings became. The streetlights flickered and went out, one by one, until we were enveloped in darkness. Yet I could still see the figure, its form outlined by a faint, otherworldly glow. We stopped in a clearing surrounded by ancient trees, their gnarled branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. In the center of the clearing was a stone altar, weathered and cracked with age. The figure turned to face me, and for the first time, I felt like it was truly seeing me, assessing me. "Do you understand what you are?" it asked. I shook my head. "No. What am I?" The figure stepped closer, and I felt its presence pressing down on me, heavy and oppressive. "You are a vessel," it said. "A bridge between worlds. You were chosen because you can see, because you can understand. But to fulfill your purpose, you must accept the darkness within you." "And if I don't?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Then you will be consumed by it," the figure said simply. "The darkness does not tolerate denial." I looked at the altar, at the runes carved into its surface, glowing faintly with an inner light. I didn't know what the figure wanted me to do, but I could feel the pull of the altar, a magnetic force that called to me. "What happens if I accept?" I asked. The figure didn't answer. Instead, it gestured toward the altar, as if to say, "Find out for yourself." I stepped forward, my heart pounding in my chest. As I placed my hands on the cold stone, a surge of energy shot through me. It wasn't painful, but it was overwhelming, as though the very fabric of reality was being rewritten around me. Visions flashed before my eyes, glimpses of other worlds, other lives, and the dark tendrils that connected them all. I saw myself standing on the precipice of something vast and incomprehensible, a part of something far greater than I had ever imagined. When the vision subsided, I realized the figure was gone. But I wasn't alone. The shadows around me were alive, shifting and swirling as if awaiting my command. I could feel their presence, their power, and for the first time, I understood. I wasn't just a vessel. I was a conduit, a nexus for the darkness that bound all things. I returned home that night changed. The world looked different, sharper, more vivid. I could see the shadows for what they truly were, not absence, but presence. Not void, but essence. They whispered to me, shared their secrets, and in return, I gave them my trust. Over the years, I've learned to harness that power, to bend the shadows to my will. I've done things I'm not proud of, things that would make most people shudder. But I've also uncovered truths that few could ever comprehend. The darkness isn't evil, not in the way we've been taught to believe. It's a force, ancient and eternal, indifferent to concepts like good and evil. And it's a part of me now, as much as I am a part of it. My 20s were a blur of experimentation and discovery, a period where I tested the boundaries of my connection to the darkness. It wasn't easy, at first, to wield its power. The shadows had their own will, their own intent, and I often felt more like a collaborator than a master. They'd whisper to me at all hours, offering guidance, warnings, or cryptic riddles that I'd spend days trying to decipher. One night, while sitting alone in my apartment, I decided to test the extent of my abilities. The city outside my window hummed with life, a stark contrast to the stillness within. I focused on the corner of the room, where the shadows were deepest, and willed them to move. To my amazement, they obeyed. The dark mass shifted and swirled, forming shapes that were almost human but distorted, like reflections in broken glass. "What are you?" I asked aloud. The shadows didn't answer, at least not in words. Instead, they formed into a figure I recognized instantly, the cloaked being from my childhood. But this time, it wasn't holding a scythe. Its hands were empty, extended toward me in a gesture that felt almost inviting. "You know what we are," it said, its voice like the rustle of dead leaves. "We are the in-between, the truth hidden in the void." "Why me?" I asked. "Why was I chosen?" The figure tilted its head, as if amused by my question. "You were born with a sight, the ability to perceive what others cannot. But more than that, you had the will to embrace it. Most would run, deny, cower. You did not." It was right. Even as a child, despite the fear, I'd never truly run from the shadows. I'd been drawn to them, even when I didn't understand why. And now, standing at the precipice of understanding, I felt something I hadn't expected: pride. "What now?" I asked. "What do you want from me?" The figure's form began to dissipate, merging back into the swirling mass of shadows. Its final words echoed in my mind. "What do you want?" That question haunted me for weeks. What did I want? Power? Knowledge? Freedom? The shadows could offer all of these, but at what cost? I wasn't naive enough to think their gifts came without strings attached. Still, The allure was impossible to resist. I began to experiment more boldly, pushing the limits of what I could do. I learned to manipulate the shadows, to bend them to my will. I could use them to obscure myself from sight, to eavesdrop on conversations, even to influence the thoughts of others. The power was intoxicating, but it was also isolating. The more I immersed myself in the darkness, the more distant I became from the people around me. Friends drifted away, unnerved by the changes they couldn't quite put into words. My family, already skeptical of my claims from childhood, grew increasingly concerned. My mother, in particular, often called to check on me, her voice laced with worry. "You don't sound like yourself," she'd say. "Are you sure you're okay?" "I'm fine, Mom," I'd reply, though we both knew it wasn't true. The truth was, I wasn't fine. I was transforming, becoming something not entirely human. The shadows weren't just a part of my life. They were becoming a part of me. My skin grew paler, my eyes darker. Even my voice took on a deeper, more resonant quality. Strangers would glance at me in the street, their expressions a mix of curiosity and unease. One night, as I walked through the city, I felt a presence following me. At first, I thought it was just paranoia, a side effect of my increasing isolation. But then I saw it, a figure, cloaked in black, its form almost identical to the one I'd seen as a child. This one, however, wasn't alone. Behind it were others, their shapes shifting and indistinct but undeniably there. They didn't approach me. They simply watched, their silent gazes boring into me. I felt no fear, only a strange sense of recognition. These were not enemies. They were kin. From that night on, I began to see them more frequently. They'd appear in the corners of my vision, in reflections, in the darkest parts of the night. They never spoke, but their presence was a constant reminder of what I was becoming. As I neared my 30s, the lines between my world and the shadow realm blurred to the point of near indistinction. Every day brought new revelations about the nature of my existence and the purpose of the gift, or curse, I had been given. The figures I once saw in the periphery now walked beside me openly, their forms clearer, more defined. They were my silent companions, guides, and sometimes tormentors. The whispers of the shadows became constant. They no longer merely advised or warned but demanded. They showed me the threads that connected everything, the unseen pathways of fate and consequence. I learned that with a mere thought, I could pull those threads, altering the course of events. But every action had its price. The more I interfered, the more tethered I became to the darkness. It wasn't long before the shadows pushed me toward a pivotal moment, one that would seal my fate. It began with a dream, or perhaps it wasn't a dream at all. I found myself standing in the center of a vast void, the darkness so absolute it felt alive. Before me stood the figure from my childhood, now towering and more imposing than ever. Its scythe had returned, glinting ominously. "The time has come," it said, its voice reverberating through the void. "You must choose." "Choose what?" I asked, though I feared the answer. "Your humanity or your destiny," it replied. "You cannot have both." The choice wasn't as simple as it sounded. To embrace my destiny meant fully merging with the shadows, becoming one with the darkness. It meant power beyond comprehension, but at the cost of my soul, my identity. To cling to my humanity meant rejecting the shadows and all they had shown me, returning to a life of ignorance and mediocrity. "And if I choose neither?" I asked, though I already knew there was no third option. The figure raised its scythe, pointing it directly at me. "To deny is to perish. The darkness does not tolerate indecision." I woke with a start, drenched in sweat, my heart pounding. The room was dark, the shadows deeper than usual. I could feel them watching, waiting for my decision. The weight of it pressed down on me, suffocating. Over the following days, the shadows grew more insistent. They showed me visions of what my life could be if I embraced them. Unimaginable power, freedom from fear, the ability to shape reality itself. But they also showed me the cost: isolation, a loss of self, and an eternal bond to the void. I tried to resist, clinging to the remnants of my humanity. I spent more time with my family, my few remaining friends, hoping their presence would ground me. But the shadows were always there, lurking, whispering. They reminded me of the power I held, the potential I was wasting. They showed me the fragility of the human connections I sought to preserve, how easily they could be broken. The breaking point came on a cold winter night. I was walking home when I saw a man being mugged in an alley. Without thinking, I summoned the shadows. They surged forward, enveloping the attacker, their whispers turning to screams. The man fled, leaving his victim unharmed but terrified. As the shadows returned to me, I realized what I had done. I had used them to protect, to save a life. But the feeling it gave me was far from noble. It was exhilarating, intoxicating. The power coursed through me, and for the first time, I didn't care about the cost. That night, I made my decision. I returned to the clearing where it all began, the stone altar waiting for me like an old friend. The figure appeared, its form more defined than ever. It didn't speak, but I could feel its approval, its satisfaction. "I'm ready," I said. I placed my hands on the altar, and the darkness surged forward, enveloping me completely. It wasn't painful, but it was overwhelming, a torrent of energy and knowledge that reshaped me. I saw the threads of fate more clearly than ever, their intricate patterns revealing the true nature of existence. I understood now that the darkness wasn't evil. It was balance, the counterweight to light, the force that held the universe together. When the transformation was complete, I stood taller, stronger. The shadows no longer whispered. They sang, a harmonious chorus that resonated within me. I was no longer merely human. I was a conduit, a vessel for the darkness. And I was at peace. In the years since that night, I've embraced my role. I walk the line between worlds, a guardian of balance. The shadows are my allies, my family. They've shown me truths that most could never comprehend, and in return, I've given them my loyalty. Sometimes, I wonder what my life would have been like if I had chosen differently. But those thoughts are fleeting. I know I made the right choice. The darkness is not to be feared. It is to be understood, embraced. It is a part of all of us, whether we acknowledge it or not. This is my story, the tale of how I became one with the shadows. And though my journey is far from over, I am no longer afraid. The darkness is my home, and I am its keeper.